Parody is perhaps one of the greatest art forms available to man. The ability to take art and spin it in an original way that offers the ability to add satire and narration, using a familiar narrative or IP to create a lens of criticism through humor. Today's modern age is no stranger to political and social commentary, but what if I told you that these types of commentaries could exist in the most unsuspecting places? My name is the Snoopy Emu, and today I'm going to be exploring the social commentary of the online Machinima series, Hacker Man. Now, for those of you who may not know, Hacker Man is a YouTube Machinima series made by the content creator Joe DeHo. This series was created to be a parody of not only the game it's made in, Watch Dogs, but also Batman. Joe DeHo uses characters and tropes in Watch Dogs and draws comparisons to the Batman film series and live-action TV show. Now, despite the goofy, funny parody that Hackerman shows on its surface, there is a deeper message within. I am here to view Hackerman through a lens of socio-political commentary. Joe uses the absurdity of this machinima to interweave a deep narrative about online discourse in the modern political climate. Now, who am I? Why am I doing this? And what are my credentials to tackle such a burning topic? I am the Snoopy Emu, a YouTuber of very little standing. Honestly, not even a full-blown YouTuber. More of a YouTube hobbyist, as you can probably tell by my terrible audio quality and lazy editing. I happen to be a good friend of Joe DeHo, and even voice act one of the characters in the series, which is part of why I take such an interest in this series, because I've spent so much time watching it and being a part of it. Now, as far as my credentials go, I'm no expert or professional by any means, but I do happen to hold a degree in social sciences with a focus on history education. Whenever I watch shows or view media of any kind, I can't help but pick up on socio-political themes and take great interest in these kinds of topics. It's so bad that I even enjoy writing essays for fun. I know, right? After the release of the fourth Hackerman video, I started to realize that there were tons of social commentary weaved within the story of the show. I had started drawing connections and coming up with these ideas and even spoke to the show's creator about it and tried to confirm some of my findings, though Joe does take great care not to reveal too much to me. Now, despite me coming to these conclusions, that alone wasn't enough to motivate me to write this essay. I recently became aware of a movie by the name of Eddington by Ari Aster. Ari Aster has recently become one of my favorite movie directors, particularly in the horror genre, as he created two of the most original horror movies of all time, in my opinion, Hereditary and Midsommar. Now, although I haven't actually seen Eddington yet, I have watched a lot of clips, trailers, and read some summaries of it online. Now, Eddington is essentially about two political figures on opposing side of the political spectrum facing off at the height of the 2020 lockdowns. While these two extremes are fighting against each other, the rich elite are manipulating things behind the scenes and plotting right under everyone's noses because everyone's too busy fighting over stupid stuff. Now, the only reason I'm bringing this up is because I think a similar narrative can be found within Hackerman. And I'm purely using the movie as a point of reference and comparison, although I just want it to be known that Hackerman did start coming out before Eddington. So I'm in no way trying to suggest that there's any sort of ripping off or anything like that. I'm just simply stating that they follow similar themes and topics, and the fact that these topics are in Eddington made me want to further dive into the implementation in the Hackerman series. Now, as I was planning out this essay, I took a deeper look into the characters of Hackerman and realized that each character can actually be used as a parallel to a modern day archetype seen in the modern internet culture. Now, I am going to be taking a lot of liberties with a lot of these characters. I highly doubt Joe put as much thought into some of this stuff than I have in hindsight, but I do think a case can be made for every named character in Hackerman serving as a representation of the many toxic roles that plague today's cyber landscape. So, what I'm going to do is go through every character, describing how they fit into the pantheon of online cretins, and then give a wider summary of the overall message and narrative. Now, I'm going to start off with the lesser characters in the series, ones who don't get a ton of screen time or don't fit their archetype as well, but I still think there is enough of a connection there to at least mention. Now, these are my own personal interpretations of these characters and tropes. I have no coordination with Joe on this. I haven't gotten any insider information. This is purely my own take on this, so just keep that in mind. The first character I'll quickly get out of the way is Yolanda. This one's pretty self explanatory because the joke is clearly mapped out in the fourth episode. Yolanda is clearly used as a jab at how the modern film industry started pumping out crappy remakes of popular film series with all female casts. This one's a more of a bit in the show. It's not really part of an overall social narrative like that the rest of the series has, but it is still very relevant to the overarching themes of wokeness and political commentary in the media. Next is Jackson, Hackerman's nephew. I think Jackson kind of plays the role of an outsider looking in. One thing a lot of people don't seem to realize is a lot of issues that happen online, a lot of these like arguments and getting canceled and a lot of the toxic online behavior is pretty irrelevant in the real world. People who don't use social media or really watch the news don't have a lot of concept of these topics and issues and kind of think everyone who does is a bit insane or at least a little stupid. I think Jackson is the closest we get in the series to kind of like a centrist or someone who isn't engaged in the online culture. Now, Jackson is in fact the Jacker, who is an online troll that makes fun of Hackerman, but I think this is just showing the sort of opinions that these kinds of people have towards the maniacs online. Jackson has no real goal or purpose with what he does as the Jacker. He's just simply pointing out how stupid and ridiculous Hackerman is as a person. I also wanted to bring up the fact that I've read a lot of recent headlines online of like the younger generations taking a big step back from a lot of the issues that millennials and Gen Xers seem to be concerned with online. And younger generations are just kind of seem to be ridding themselves of a lot of these like overly political topics. And I feel like Jackson can kind of be seen as a representation of this viewpoint, which still kind of coincides with being an outsider to all this and having more of a centrist view. Nicole, or Hackerman's sister, Jackson's mother, doesn't really have much of a strong role in early installments of this series, but after the fourth episode, Nicole did start to remind me of a type of person online that I wasn't really aware of until recently. I remember back when all the EBT welfare stuff got changed and the government started cracking down on people who were abusing the system. There were tons of these women on TikTok and social media just completely crashing out about how it isn't fair and that they shouldn't have to get jobs and don't want to work. And they seemed genuinely confused and upset by the need to work and not just having the government pay for them, despite being perfectly able to work. In Hackerman Part 2, it's revealed that Nicole kicks her son out of the house just to be with the crippler. And in Part 4, she confirms that she's only marrying him to get free handicap parking. To me, this kind of draws a connection of these types of lazy, selfish people who abuse the system and manipulate others to get free rides and benefits when they're perfectly able to work on their own and are just ruining the system for the people that actually need help. Now, another character that wears their joke on their sleeve, or in this character's case, a tattoo sleeve, Bad Boy 17. Bad Boy, or Clara, basically plays the same role in Hackerman as she does in the actual game, with the obvious parallel of being Hackerman's Oracle. But in this version, Clara plays the role of an OnlyFans girl. Now, in the modern day and age, the internet and society in general has become overly sexualized, with explicit content being literally everywhere. It has become way too common and acceptable for women to have OnlyFans accounts. In fact, I remember at my old job working with multiple girls that had OF accounts. And in my opinion, this type of porn has basically just replaced prostitution in the modern day. Girls on OnlyFans selling themselves and messaging desperate losers to milk more money out of them. Bad Boy displays all of the horrible toxic traits of greedy, selfish OF girls. Clara is so greedy and protective of her exclusive content that she seduces and uses Hackerman to hunt down and kill people just to get her content back. Even after sleeping with Hackerman, she still demands that he pays her to view her nude pictures. Bad Boy is a manifestation of the disgusting OF culture on the internet and how women online manipulate lonely, pathetic men to make more money and feel better about themselves. Now, getting into the deeper characters in the series, this is where I'm going to be drawing more comparison to Eddington. Creepy Uncle Joe was obviously intended to be a parody of Joe Biden and his deteriorated mental state. This character is also kind of meant to be a parallel to the Penguin. Now, I think Uncle Joe is a representation of the elite in this case, similar to the movie Eddington, while Hackerman and the others are fighting and getting caught up in each other's schemes. Uncle Joe is left completely unchecked to command the underworld and do God knows what. Much like in real life, as political parties clash and the everyday people are constantly at each other's throats over social issues and petty disagreements, the rich and elite are free to do as they please without us even noticing. Even in the real world, like, instead of uniting over an issue like, say, the Epstein files, instead of everyone uniting over a common goal and trying to uncover this mystery and do something about it, people are just still fighting and bickering and trying to use this as like some way to just get at people like Donald Trump and Bill Clinton, and trying to undermine the other sides instead of taking a step back and realizing that there are literal children being victimized and preyed upon, and everyone is just using this as a means to get at each other and just create more discourse. We as a society have become a parody of ourselves at this point. So I was kind of amazed when I did see Eddington and hear that a lot of these topics and issues were being looked at, and that's what made me really want to dissect this series from this socio-political stance, and also to kind of just point out the stupidity that is the human race, and more specifically what has become of the American people. Now, we're finally getting into the heavy hitters. The lesser of the final three, a character very near and dear to my heart, the Crippler. This character is obviously meant to be kind of a take on the Riddler with a little bit of Heath Ledger's Joker thrown in. Now, this character is a massive deviation from his Watch Dogs counterpart, Damien. All these final three kind of are, really. Crippler is an example of people who can't handle criticism and bullying and seek retaliation. Now, all these final characters are kind of like this, but instead of seeking generalized justice, Crippler specifically targets Hackerman and tries to ruin his entire life just for making fun of him. Whereas I would compare Hackerman and Throbbing to vigilantes, Crippler is more reminiscent of a doxer. Someone who is pushed so far that they need to destroy the very person who wronged them. Now, as much as Crippler was trying to ruin HM's life, it also seems to me that he's slightly obsessed with Hackerman, similar to Joker and Batman. Now, this theory does kind of work into the topic of parasocial relationships and how horribly terrible and harmful those can be. which is a perfect segue into the penultimate character I'm going to discuss. Throbbin, Hacker Man's Robin, or I guess Azrael, is an extremely passionate fan of Hacker Man, doing everything he can to be just like him. Throbbin's ideology is similar to Hacker Man's, but on the other side of the spectrum. Throbbin represents the far-right, anti-woke, incel redditor Gooner. Throbbin represents the people that are so fed up with woke culture being inserted into games that they accuse everything of being woke even when it isn't. Throbbin believes that woke people are infected and need to be purged, which seems to upset Hackerman, which is an important detail for later. After talking about Throbbin and Hackerman individually, I'll talk about them together and their dichotomy and how they kind of work well as foils. Now, for the man himself, the most ethical of all hackers, Hackerman. Hackerman is the main character, so we see everything from his perspective and spend most of the time with him. Hackerman is an insecure, petty, manipulative psychopath. He murders innocent people and justifies it because he is supposedly ethical. Hackerman represents the far-left, woke Twitter mob. Now, Hackerman's obsession with stuffed sheep means he's either extremely lonely or he's a furry. Also, in part 4, we hear Sheepy speak, so I think it's possible that Hackerman is also schizophrenic. Now, in psychology, people that display mental illness tied with sexual deviancy tend to have several psychological issues. Now, as much as HM is the main character of the story and a parallel to Batman, he is no hero. He gets mocked and criticized by everyone. Nicole, Yolanda, Jackson, Throbbin, they all mock him and think he's an idiot. Throbbin straight up tries to kill him as soon as he finds out HM is just a creep that defiles stuffed animals. He's also a white knight and constantly shifts blame. As much as everyone in the story can be seen as a toxic online archetype, Hackerman is a symbol of the modern internet as a whole. Hackerman is the embodiment of a gross, pervy, toxic internet troll that sees himself as perfect and justified. He can't handle bullying or criticism and uses it as an excuse to murder and commit crime. A great scene that showcases Hackerman's fractured psyche is his talk with Jackson at the end of part 3 when he is desperately trying to explain his logic and is struggling hard. This is also where HM justifies his actions by saying that trolls and bullies are not human and therefore it's okay to murder them. I think this quote from Patrick Ness fits well here. To say you have no choice is to relieve yourself of a responsibility. Now this is where I want to bring up Throbbin again. Throbbin justifies murdering people by saying that they were infected by the woke mind virus, and thus they were already dead before he killed them. In this scene, Hackerman is confused and concerned. When Hackerman is faced with someone as deluded and insane as he is, he actually responds like a rational person, which he isn't at all. Hackerman suffers from self-serving bias, but fails to see this in other people. It seems that when faced with a similar personality, HM kind of shuts down and questions that person, all while failing to see the exact qualities within himself. This goes to show just how deep Hackerman's self-serving bias goes, and when factoring in that he beat down a street performer for not playing his theme song, it's possible that he may also have some qualities of a megalomaniac. Now, in the case of Throbbin, he doesn't come to odds with Hackerman because of how he operates, but because of his views. Throbbin adored Hackerman until he realized that Hackerman was just a closeted sexual deviant. Now, Throbbin seems to suffer more from normalcy bias, where instead of trying to convince himself that he is ethical or make excuses for his actions like Hackerman does, Thraben acts as if everything he does is completely normal and common sense. Thraben is not manipulative when he speaks. He doesn't try to convince people. He just speaks as if everything he were saying was completely normal and factual, like any other commonality. Two examples I would use to showcase this is one where Hackerman is trying to justify himself to Jackson in the car at the end of part 3, and when Thraben is speaking to Hackerman at the canal in part 4. Hackerman uses excuses and justifications when he speaks, whereas Thraben just states and explains. Now, as much as Thraben is painted as an incel redditor, he somehow ends up looking better than Hackerman. I think part 4 would have been a great time to see Hackerman reflect, and maybe we will see that in later parts, but Hackerman just seems to ignore any criticism and be completely blind to everything around him. In the final confrontation at the lighthouse, we see both Thraben and Crippler point out tragic flaws of Hackerman. Thraben betrays him and loses all his admiration and respect for Hackerman when he finds out who he really is on the inside. And from Crippler's perspective, he seems very upset by the fact that Hackerman is so concerned with his delusions of grandeur that he can't even acknowledge that his sister's about to get married, and is so convinced that everyone is out to get him that he can't even realize that Crippler is genuinely in love with Nicole. Now, I may be a little biased myself here, but as the voice actor for the Crippler, the final scene was full of conviction and emotion on my end. Those lines weren't just throwaway. The Crippler was genuinely upset. Also, just as a quick little behind the scenes factoid, I had a sinus infection during the recording session, and that's why my voice was so gritty and raspy in that last scene, and I think it made the delivery way better and more intense. I'm very proud of how it came out. Now, I'm saying all this because I honestly think that Crippler was trying to get to know Hackerman in his own twisted way. Similar to Joker and Batman, I felt like there was this underlying connection forming, but Hackerman was too busy dancing around in his underwear with his stuffed sheep to notice. Now, I'm no expert, but if I were to give a diagnosis for Hackerman, I would say that he most likely suffers from borderline personality disorder. Now, this level of psychosis does actually seem to fit with his archetype of representing the Twitter blue sky mob. Now, I'm not saying that everyone on Blue Sky has BPD, but I do think that being able to hide behind a phone screen on social media does deteriorate a person's sense of judgment and rational thinking. Unfortunately, though, this behavior seems to be going beyond online behavior, and as we're seeing in modern times with all these protests, riots, and Antifa and so on, social media seems to be deteriorating people's grasp on reality and is leading to real life disasters with people being so convinced and delusional due to online discourse that they can't separate reality from online and are becoming fully psychotic because of it. This leads me to my final point. I think Hackerman tells a precautionary tale showing the grim reality and future of what can happen if online discourse isn't resolved in a healthy manner. With as insane as the real world is becoming, I feel like we're just a few bad days away from people like Hackerman and Thraben actually existing. I mean, New York City is already basically become Gotham at this point. Now, I don't want it to seem like I'm just purely targeting the Twitter side of the spectrum. In the last few weeks, people like Thraben, the more anti woke Reddit side of things, has been really starting to get on my nerves. Especially with the new live action One Piece trailer, people aren't even trying to think critically or research or understand things. The anti woke side has now become just as ridiculous and insufferable as the woke side. Now, obviously, the anti woke has only really become this ridiculous because of the woke in the first place, but now it's just become a cesspool of stupidity and lack of accountability. Hackerman, the show, not the character, is a reflection on modern day and exposes the stupidity and foolishness of modern social conflicts. Hackerman is a narration on modern media and makes light of those issues while also proposing a grim outcome of potential escalation from online discourse to real life conflict. Also, while all this is going on, we still don't know what happens in the shadows. In the back of our minds, we know of creepy Uncle Joe, but are unaware of what he's actually doing. He seems to be in command of a massive underground syndicate, but since we see the story through the eyes of Hackerman, we are blind to it, much like how we are blind to what real life elites are doing beneath our noses. Now, I don't know what Joe, the creator, not the character, plans to do in the future episodes. I'm also not really familiar with Watch Dogs in general, but now that Crippler is gone, I think Uncle Joe may start becoming a bigger threat, also since Lucky is a major villain in the game. Although, I also believe the story will continue to focus on the conflicts of Hackerman and Throbbin because I'm pretty sure Jordy is still alive in the Watch Dogs series, so he'll probably keep showing up. Granted, Joe is free to change the story however he wants, but this is just my speculation. In the future, I do plan to make a follow up video after the Hackerman series is finished, or at least has more episodes, and go over what I got wrong and how the narrative has changed over time. Until then, though, these are all my thoughts on the Hackerman series so far and its underlying social commentary and political narrative. I hope this all makes sense. I tend to go off on tangents, and I'm hoping that this is somewhat coherent. I really enjoyed diving into these characters and exploring both the psychological as well as the sociological elements of them and the world around them. Now, I suck at outros, so I'll leave you with a quick quote from Gandhi. Freedom is not worth having if it does not include the freedom to make mistakes. In my own words, if we cannot forgive and compromise, we will only find darkness.